So I just finished building one of these targets, 4 foot by 4 foot by 12 inches deep, made following the instructions in the target skins from Third Hand Archery, which by the way, Jim from Third Hand sent me, and big shout out and thanks to him for sending those over. I've been using one of his bow holders on my tree stand for years and years and years, so I figured this would probably be a good product, but of course had to check it out first. And I probably put about 300 to 400 shots into it so far, I'd guess. As far as the actual build itself, it came with a sheet of instructions, and it's based off the fact that you're using 12-inch wide lumber, and then the front face is just 1/4 inch by like 1.5 inch wide trim that goes around. Underneath the target skins themselves, which there's one on the front and one on the back, it calls out to use black plastic or black fabric of some kind, and essentially the only purpose it serves is to make sure that you can't see all your stuffing material through the white face of the fabric. So I just used some black landscaping fabric and I attached that down underneath the skins. This target is made to be a field point target, not a broadhead target. And one of the main, I don't know if I should say concerns, one of the main questions I had about this target was, you know, you can buy these skins from Third Hand for around $40. What makes them special, what makes them different from just using like a tarp and otherwise doing the build on your own? Could you use, you know, like a feed bag or some other kind of material other than the skins that they sell? And so I asked Jim this question, and he said, going back years and years and years, like 35 years ago, he found out by accident that clothes, old clothes, stopped arrows well. I don't know the full story behind that, but it's probably pretty interesting. But he had a company that he worked with that had this fabric, and that fabric worked well for containing all the clothes. And he had a bag target that he sold, and they tested over 100 different kinds of fabric to test for durability of the fabric itself, how well it did outside, how well they could print onto it, and they eventually wound up just using the fabric that we still have today and that is currently in my target. And in fact, on some of the targets that Third Hand sells, some of the skins, I should say, they're not full targets. They do have warranties. The 4x4 doesn't have a warranty because there's no spots printed on it, but the other target skins, like the 3x3 that do have printing on it, they do have warranties. If you punch through a certain size hole over time shooting X number of arrows. As I was building this thing, I read through a bunch of threads on Archery Talk to try and figure out what modifications from the original design people had made, what they decided to stuff their target with to stop the arrows. Of course, Jim said use old clothes. It's the best thing they found over the decades that these things have been sold. I gathered all the clothing that I could find in my house, and it basically got up to about right there. And it was like 3 laundry baskets full of stuff that I was just gonna take to Goodwill. So then I had all the rest of this stuff to fill up with. And I had seen people using, you know, old plastic bags, which I've also heard could stick to the arrows, a whole bunch of different things. But what I eventually decided to do was, we have a Goodwill here in the Twin Cities that has basically bulk shopping. You can go in there and fill up a shopping cart, roll up the shopping cart onto a scale, and they'll charge you 99 cents a pound. And so after I had filled the target up to here, it took one trip of 48 pounds to get the target to about right here, and then one more trip of 25 pounds to really stuff it in the top. And I was really jamming those clothes tightly in there. And I wanted to try and stick with items that were synthetic rather than cotton, so I went and grabbed all like the fleece throws, comforters that were synthetic, all that kind of stuff, just because they pack together really well. It was less total garments than trying to go through like a bunch of sweatshirts and t-shirts and stuff. So I really tried to stay with those fleece blankets. And it seems to have been holding up very well so far. The other kind of question or concern that I had is, how is it going to hold up with micro diameter shafts? Because I've got standard diameters, I've got lots of micro diameters for hunting and just kind of general shooting. For the last few years, I've really moved toward micro diameters. I've got some pierced platinums that I shoot out of my compound. And then I've gone through a bunch of different things with my recurve, but what I'm using right now is some Victory VIPs. And the thing with shooting those kind of arrows into this target is, of course, if there's anything that can catch on the back side of that insert, it'll make the arrow harder to remove. And then it, of course, also can degrade the life of the target, I guess. So your best bet for target longevity is going to be standard diameter shafts. But basically all the shooting that I've been doing in this thing so far has been with these micro diameters. And yeah, it sticks a little bit. Sometimes you need to pull the thing out, but so far there's no big gashes, no big holes. It's still stopping the arrows just fine. I shot my compound basically at point blank range, 25 arrows as soon as I had this thing put together, all pretty much in the same spot. Didn't adjust the target at all, and none of those arrows were protruding through the backside of the target, which was a good sign, obviously. The backside of the target was bulging out a bit, and if you kind of shoot across the entire face and spread the arrows out, it does kind of seem to really negate that. It's only when you shoot in the same spot over and over and over again that you get that little segregated bulge. But then what you can do once you shoot this thing a lot is you can take the whole target, rotate it 180 degrees, and then start shooting it back the other way, and that kind of takes all that stuffing and slowly moves it back the other direction. So following that kind of a pattern, you could of course use this thing for a really long time. Some of the other mods that I'm not going to be doing for this target, but I've seen other people use. One, I've seen people add wheels so they can move the target around. It's extremely heavy, obviously, because you got not only close to 100 pounds of stuffing in here, but also you got the weight of the lumber, the 2x12s, and everything else. So it makes sense to have something that's mobile. What would make more sense to me if I had the space to do it, if I had the space outside to have a 60, 80, 100 yard range, I would almost rather just put that target in one spot, build a nice awning to go over the top to keep the rain running off of it, and then just drill in arrow holders at 20, 30, 40, all the way back, so that I'm moving myself as opposed to having to move the target, which is going to be a lot easier. The other thing that I found through reading the various forums is that for sticking targets onto the face of the target itself, these plastic cap nails for roofing work really well. The actual nail itself is kind of got like a ribbed surface, and then of course you got this nice, probably a 3/4 inch diameter plastic face. So when you stick this thing into a piece of paper, you can hear it really grip into the face of the fabric, and it holds those things in there really nice and well. So to this point so far, out of the few hundred arrows I put in this thing, I've been pretty happy shooting both the recurve and the compound. The compound, obviously the arrows are going a lot further than they will the recurve, and that kind of depends also on what you're going to stuff it with and how tightly you pack it. If you got a bunch of kids that are going to be shooting these type of targets, then you don't want to stuff it as full, because sometimes those arrows will just bounce out. Versus if you're shooting like a crossbow, you're really going to want to pack that stuff in, or maybe even bump up to a wider target overall and put more clothing in it to try and get that total stopping force. So I'll probably end up doing a follow-up video on this, maybe several months down the road, just to see how this target face has continued to hold up after continued shooting with these micro diameter shafts. But so far at this point, I've been pretty happy with it. So if you guys have built one of these yourselves, or you're thinking about it, have any more questions, leave them down in the comments down below. I'd love to hear what other mods some of you guys have come up for this thing. Thanks for watching.